Thank you, Darren. Greetings and hello, and welcome to everyone who is joining us for this conversation and some really interesting, great time coming up with Dr. Gloria Donnelly. I'm Sherry Goodill. I'm chairperson of the Department of Creative Arts Therapies here in the College of Nursing and Health Professions, and had the great pleasure of working with Dr. Donnelly for many years when the college was formed. And it's a very interesting topic, one that's very important to me in my work as well, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. As Darren mentioned, Dr. Donnelly is Dean Emeritus, Professor Emeritus, and founding Dean of the College of Nursing and Health Professions. She is also the editor of the Holistic Nursing Practice Journal and has been for a very long time. Of course, she is the author of the book that is the topic of our work today, Overcoming Secondary Stress in Medical and Nursing Practice. It is published by Oxford University Press, and it's available on Amazon. Little known fact, or maybe not so little known, Dr. Donnelly is also a fabulous stand-up comic, and looking forward to perhaps moments of humor even as we move through the hour together. If everybody's ready, I'd like to go ahead and start with the conversation. There will be a time for questions and answers with Dr. Donnelly at the end of the hour. However, you are welcome to pose questions into the chat as we proceed. And Darren will be retrieving those questions for us when we pause for questions. Generously, Dr. Donnelly has saved ample time at the end for Q&A, so we really can move into a discussion together. I'm going to go ahead and start now. Welcome, Gloria. Welcome back.
Nice to be back.
Fantastic.
From the comfort of my home.
Likewise. So just to get us started, I wonder if you can talk about how you came to participate as the co-author of this book, and what background did you bring to it?
Well, you know, it was really pure serendipity. I had been reading some of Bob Wicks' work. I did not know that he lived in Westchester, and I happened to buy his little book, Riding the Dragon, at the bookstore, which is across the driveway from our condo. And I saw a sign that he was coming for a book signing. So I took my book back to the book signing when he came there, and we got to talking. And I asked him where he had gone to school. And he is a graduate of Hahnemann. He got his PhD at Hahnemann, and that prompted another whole line of conversation that he had been working in psychology and psychotherapy, particularly with relief workers around the world. So after, for example, after the war ended in Rwanda, he was brought there to work with relief workers who had experienced horrendous kinds of situations that prompted all kinds of secondary stress. And so he wrote the first edition of this book in, I think it was 2007, and Oxford called him to ask him, in light of the pandemic, did he think he could do a second edition and really expand the focus? Not the first edition was more physician, some nursing oriented, but it really didn't mention any other caregivers. And after we met, I had a meeting, a luncheon. I sponsored a luncheon out here in Wellington and brought in a few of the chairs. I don't know if you attended that luncheon, Sherry, to meet him, since he was a graduate of Hahnemann. And one thing led to another, and he invited me to co-author this second edition with him. And I just jumped at the chance because I always wanted to work with Oxford University Press. And it was an opportunity to really offer something to caregivers, particularly direct caregivers, you know, those on the front lines of the COVID pandemic, nurses, physician assistants, and physicians. And so we decided that would be our focus, direct caregivers. And then he pretty much gave me carte blanche to go in, to add what I needed to add, to delete what we agreed should be replaced and updated, and finish the project in, I guess, 3 or 4 months. We were a month ahead of schedule. And it really has been a pleasure working with Oxford, because they do listen to their authors and consult them about marketing, about the cover, about the design of the book. And so it was a very different and good experience for me. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity. And I loved working with Bob.
Thank you. That brings us here to
Yeah.
the actual book.
So there's the book. And
so as we look at this, I wonder if you'll be able to talk with us about how secondary stress differs from other forms of stress. When we all have stress, right?
We all have stress. Every role, right? Every role, every job, every walk of life, we all have stress. And at work, let's say, you know, you're a teacher, and your stress, your work stress would be deadlines, numbers of students, the environment. Maybe if you think about the pandemic, having to move very quickly online, although that was really not so much an issue in your college. But those are kind of normative stressors that go with every job. But secondary stress is different. And I like to tell caregivers, direct caregivers, to think of it as an extra layer of stress that we experience as a function of caring for others. So it's that pressure that results from our reaching out to others in need and from experiencing the results of that reach out. So if you think about the pandemic, think about caring for a patient in ICU who is dying but cannot see their family. That takes a terrific toll on direct caregivers. And there are so many stories of nurses, PAs, physicians coming up with very unique ways to keep patients in touch. You know, I'm sure you've seen on TV the picture of the nurse with a phone, and she's reconnecting a loved one with family. And this pandemic has been particularly a tremendous source of secondary stress for direct caregivers. So it's that kind of pressure, and it piles up. And after a while, and we're seeing it now in the statistics, we're seeing nurses, physicians, PAs taking timeouts, dropping out of the profession. There's statistics on chronic illness, on depression. There was just a study in Nursing Outlook on attrition from nursing positions as a result of the stress of the pandemic. So those are kind of the results of the secondary stress, which is added on top of all those, I call them normative stressors that we all experience in any work environment. So let me, whoops. So these are the current drivers of secondary stress in healthcare. The pandemic, I don't even have to mention the kind of exposure that has created to healthcare providers in the U.S. healthcare system that wasn't prepared. There were a lack of beds, a lack of equipment. There is an explosion of literature on unhealthy work environments, toxic work environments in all of the professions. And so you have that. And then you have the demands of technology expansion. And the physician that wrote the foreword for the book is actually a professor in Drexel's medical school, Arnie Iser. And he has his own take on the kinds of pressures that particularly are impinging on physicians. And one of them is the demands of documentation, computerized documentation, telehealth visits, and all of these activities that limit the real time with patients, being pressed by insurance companies to do this instead of that, and experiencing a loss of authority and autonomy. There are tremendously looming provider shortages. We know the aging of the population is creating a driving need for nurses and direct care providers, PAs, PTs, mental health professionals. And just as an example, by 2024, there will be an estimated another 440,000 RN positions. Well, where are we going to get them? And these are some of the drivers of this secondary stress. And then there's health disparities and having to deal with health disparities, much like the staff does down at 11th Street. So Bob got a grant and we just sent, I wish I could have done this for everyone in the college, but we sent everyone in the health center a copy of the book because they're working in a high stress environment with health disparities. And so hopefully they will have a tool that they could use to kind of look at themselves and ameliorate their own stress.
I'm aware that some level of attention to self-care has always been part of our lives as healthcare professionals, but that the pandemic has really shined a light on the importance of self-care in healthcare professionals.
Right. And of course, I don't think, Sherry, even though, in the research for the book, one of the most interesting discoveries I made was that the physician assistant discipline, their accrediting body mandates self-care and stress management content in the curriculum. But I don't think nursing does, and I don't think medicine does, even though nursing and medicine have they have programs available to practicing caregivers, but there's not a mandate in the curriculum. I don't know if medicine has yet mandated that. Do your accrediting bodies mandate that?
Yes. Most mental health professionals do include this in the training and expect that people attend to their own well-being in order to be effective giving care. So I'm curious as to what's next and what the book is offering.
Well, these are some of the signs of secondary stress. And sometimes you don't even know that things have caught up with you. There's a story that I like to tell from when I was a student. I was a student at the United States Naval Hospital during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now, that's a long time ago. And I was assigned to a patient who we had 400 inpatients. They were flying them in from all over the Atlantic theater because war was imminent and these young men were breaking down left and right. And I was assigned to a young sailor. He was, I think, 21, and he had experienced a psychotic break, and they shipped him to Philadelphia, and I was assigned to be his nurse. All of the students had 2 or 3 patients they were assigned to, and we had a protocol for what we were supposed to do and keep process recordings, and you know the whole deal. Well, I did very well with this patient, and I used to see his psychiatrist once a week, and we would discuss, and the psychiatrist felt, you know, as a student that I was doing some good for this patient. And it was the last week of the rotation. My instructor and I were in occupational therapy in that unit, and my patient came in. He was a young African-American patient. And I'm telling you that because of the gift that he wanted to give me. And he approached me, and he had in his hand a ceramic black angel. And he said, I know you're not going to be here anymore, so I made this for you in occupational therapy. And I put my hand out to accept it. And my instructor, who was a good soul, but she was kind of rigid. She was kind of like maybe 3 degrees better than Nurse Ratched. She said, Miss Ferraro, you know the rule, no gifts. You cannot accept that gift. Now I'm standing there in front of the patient who's got his hand extended with the gift. And I just looked at him, and he took the angel and threw it against the wall, and it smashed in 100 pieces. He ran out of the room, and I never saw him again. Now that was 55 years ago. I still think about it. I still think about what happened to that patient. Could I have handled it differently? Could I have ignored the instructor and just stepped up and taken it? Or could I have turned to the instructor and said, you know, mind your own business? I mean, what would have been a different strategy than my just standing there? And I think it's those kinds of situations that you have with patients that create that secondary stress. You know, I was always a psychiatric nurse and always worked in the mental health field. So when I experienced a patient who committed suicide one night. He went home, he drowned himself in the tub, and I wondered for weeks, could I have done anything differently? Could I have, like in the pandemic, could I have found a better way to have the family communicate with the patient? Could I have been more comforting? Could I have spent more time? And these things build up, and then you sometimes end up with the signs of secondary stress. You might have mood changes, boredom and indifference. You might withdraw from your friends or become cynical and arrogant, or you become a workaholic and you immerse yourself in task after task after task. And I can tell you, I've worked with both physicians and nurses like this who are working at such a pace and not seeming to think about what they're doing to themselves and the effect they're having on others. And they're depleted. They just don't seem, they are working on automatic pilot, and they are not getting the satisfaction that we should be getting out of helping and working with others. They might get into conflict with patients, with families, with colleagues, experience helplessness, or become a chronic helper. And there are always people in the environment who are sometimes into this chronic helping role, who have an inability to set limits. That could be a function or a sign of secondary stress. And there are probably a lot more signs, but I think these are early ones that help you to kind of recognize where, what am I doing? Where am I going? What do I think about on the drive home in the car? How am I relaxing? How am I with friends, with family? Am I always on edge? And so this is what the book helps you to get into and to recognize, because you can get past it, as you know.
Yes, I'm really thinking about how the memories of the people that one cannot help. Like the story of the soldier when you were almost there and your ability to help him was thwarted, and those stories stay with you. And there's really a psychophysiological burden that when you carry those memories around, you learn from those experiences, but you also carry those memories, and they can weigh heavily over time, especially if the practitioner does not develop good self-care practices or have sufficient support structures for doing that. So, I know that you wanted to talk about the dangers that secondary stress can present to healthcare practitioners and maybe even educators.
Right. And the dangers, of course, are that you can go down the continuum. And the continuum of stress. You experience stress, you're having some symptoms, you don't do anything about it, and then it gets worse, and you could go from vicarious stress all the way to PTSD, and really get yourself into depression and worse. So there's anxiety, there's depression, there's post-traumatic stress disorder. The continuum is there if you don't stop yourself at some point and ask yourself, how well do you take care of yourself? What is it that you do? Do you make conscious efforts? And I'm not going to only talk about the mental health part of it. Yesterday, I just read an article. It's in the latest issue of Harper's Magazine on the downside of meditation. I never thought I would read an article like that, but here's a guy who's reporting all the research on the negative aspects of getting obsessive with any practice. And of course, he's focusing on meditation. So you ask yourself, do you make a conscious effort to improve your nutrition or eat right? Do you exercise? Do you do things that calm your mind and your emotions? Maybe that means turning off the news or turning off the TV or listening to certain kinds of music, or just sitting quietly or taking a walk. Do you get sufficient rest and interaction with supported friends and family? And one of the things that we really emphasize in the book is the importance of friends, and having people think about, do you have a friend in your life that could tell you the absolute unvarnished truth? And you will listen to it. Now, you might not like what they say, but do you have a friend like that? In the book, and that's kind of Bob's piece of the book, where he talks about the cheerleader friend, the friend who always tells you how great you are. But then there's the harasser, who tells you the truth. And you need that kind of person in your life because they help you to develop perspective. That is, which also includes how you automatically react to situations and frame them. You know, the early part of my career in psychiatric nursing, mental health nursing, I used to fly around the country with the 3M company and do assertiveness training for nurses who worked in operating rooms. And so I was part of a team, and 3M is a company that makes a lot of products that are used in the OR. And this team that they flew around the country was kind of like a give back to organizations that bought their products and so forth. And it was really interesting for me because so many of the participants in these workshops were nurses who were working in what I would call now abusive environments. One nurse had a scalpel thrown at her foot and it went, went through the shoe, and who gets kicked under the table and who's throwing instruments across the room. I don't know that that still happens because there are rules now that hospitals and the medical profession has put in place, but those were the kinds of situations. And we would talk about reactions to those situations and how, let's say, the nursing department was framing them and whether or not the nursing department was supporting them and giving them tools and strategies to avoid those kinds of situations. So it was about, and I would work with nurses who would blame themselves. Dr. So-and-so threw an instrument, threw a hemostat at me. I must be so stupid. I can't tell you how many times I heard things like that. And then we would work together to try to shift their perspective. Self-talk is very important. I know I talk to myself all the time. It really annoys my husband. In the car, it's a great place to rehearse. It's a great place to imagine yourself in difficult situations and then develop new responses. And it is interesting how often those responses come to mind when you're in a difficult situation because you've rehearsed them, they're in your files. And so think about your own self-talk in situations. I used to work with faculty when I was a dean who would say to me, I would never speak up in a meeting. Why? Well, because so-and-so would come to my office after the meeting and harangue me, and nurses will often say, I don't speak up because I don't want to be fired. That's a very common, and you know what? If you can't speak up, I'm not saying angrily or in a very negative way, but you do have a right to speak up. And if part of your self-care assessment is that you react very negatively in situations which either hold you back or get you to shoot from the hip, then you have to do something about that. And it could be that privately rehearsing is helpful to you. What I think the book does is the book gives you so many strategies. There's, for example, a self-assessment questionnaire for you that asks you 60 questions about how you behave and how you respond. And the intent is for you to sit down and read the question and think about it. And think about whether or not you can make other choices in how you respond to others or how you respond to difficult situations. There's a toxic environment assessment. giving you the criteria for figuring out whether or not you work in a toxic environment, and then helping you to figure out what you're going to do about that. So what the book focuses on is a good deal of self-assessment. What do you think? What's your perspective? How do you behave? And then based on your answers, gives you the tools to develop your own self-care protocol. And every protocol will be unique to the individual. So there are no formula in here. It's just about thinking about how you feel and then assessing how you were going to make changes in the way that you care for yourself. And I think that's probably the most succinct way to describe it.
I'd love to go back, Gloria, if you're willing to this idea of the good friend who really sees you, right, and that gives that perspective, and the self-care assessment alone sort of implies our own self-awareness, right, and that the friend sometimes reflects back and increases self-awareness. And I wonder if you can talk about why self-awareness is such a key element in addressing secondary stress.
Well, I think self-awareness is the key to a relatively happy life. If you don't think about how you're behaving, if you don't think about how people perceive you, if you don't think about your own reactivity, then you limit your choices. And I think a lot of my philosophy about this comes from the Eastern literature. I read a lot in Zen. I have some favorite books. I love Thich Nhat Hanh, who wrote No Mud, No Lotus. And the Buddhist philosophy is everybody suffers. I mean, suffering is part of life. So let's figure out how we're going to respond even to the minor sufferings. Are we overreacting? There's the story of the arrow, which I love, where you get pierced by an arrow and the initial pain is very short. And then the arrow is removed and you're recovering. But then you have the second reaction. You're going to go after the person that shot the arrow. You're going to retaliate. You are thinking that you're worthless or you were stupid to get yourself in that situation. So there's the initial reaction, which is pain. But then there are all the stories you tell yourself about what happened. And whether or not those stories help you or hinder you is really the key, I think, to moving into a mode where you are taking better care of yourself because you are more self-aware. I'm sure, everyone listening to this presentation has said to themselves at one time or another, just stop it. Just stop thinking that way, because all you're doing is making yourself more upset. So it's that kind of self-assessment and self-talk and being aware of your own emotions and then choosing what to do with them. I think there are, in working over the years with, mostly with, I would call the worried well, I really took care of very sick patients when I was young, early in my career. I worked in psychiatric hospitals and so forth. But I guess for the middle 25 years of my career, worked primarily with the worried well. And they were people out working like the 3M nurses or the physicians or the health professionals that I worked with to help hone their self-awareness and carve a path to self-knowledge. In other words, it's important for you to know what pushes your buttons. Now, that's a colloquial. And then when you're in a situation where you know your buttons are going to get pushed, you kind of insulate. You listen, you reflect, you may bring your friends. I have a colleague who was going through a very difficult situation at her workplace, and she was going into a meeting with a provost and people who were trying to move her out of the situation. And she asked me to go with her. And I said, oh. I said, well, I'm not a lawyer. No, I don't want a lawyer. I want my friend there. And I said, well, do you have permission to bring me? Yes, I do. So I went. I don't think I said 2 words in that meeting, which is very difficult for me. And she got everything she wanted because of the way she behaved. All I did was sit there, but she apparently needed someone she trusted, who she could lean on if it was necessary. And she got through this situation beautifully and actually did very well and got everything she wanted. I think that's a good example of, using these kinds of strategies and attitudes and people in your life to get through difficult situations.
It's really a mix of strategies there that her knowing
right.
that she needed you there was part of her self-awareness.
Exactly.
Right?
So she didn't trust herself,
yeah,
but she admitted it.
Yeah.
And it was kind of intriguing for me. And I said to her after it was over, I said, tell me why you think you got permission to bring me to this very private, difficult meeting. And she said, well, I think I had a good relationship with the provost, and he trusted that I would not bring someone disruptive. And it all worked out. So she kind of traded on the trust she knew she had and developed a strategy to bring a support person to get through the situation, which I think on her part was pretty sophisticated. So, even in, I think there's a lot of this focus on self and looking around your environment, avoiding negative people. We make a big point in the book of avoiding negativity. When that conversation starts in the coffee room that's trashing this one or that one, you leave. Because you don't want to get into that kind of negative mindset, because it's not good for your health. Now, there are lots of people who really turn to religion and spirituality, and we also address that in the book. Embracing periodic silence, solitude. There's a reflection exercise where you kind of cultivate your own spirituality, or look to your belief system to see, can that be a self-care strategy for you? So there's really something for everyone, even humor. Talk a little bit about humor. I was director of a hospital school of nursing, and once a week I used to make rounds in the evening because the students would be in various departments of the hospital. It was a community hospital. It had a very, very active emergency room. And it was in South Philly, which is my neighborhood. I was born and raised there. so I knew the terrain. And I went down to the ER that night to check on the students and the instructor. And the ER was in a flurry. The police were there. You could see the red lights from the police cars outside. And I walked in, and the ER fellow, the resident, came over. I knew him. And I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "Well," he said, "we had a body that was dropped off." He said a big limousine pulled up in front of the ER doors, and the back door opened, and a big garbage bag with the body in it was pushed out, and the car sped away. Oh my God, I thought. I said, "Oh." He said, "Yeah, that happened about an hour and a half ago." And he said, "But we're still trying to determine the cause of death." I said, "What do you mean? I mean, was he shot? Was he stabbed?" He said, "Well, we think it was suicide." I said, "Suicide?" And he's telling me this with a straight face. And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "The only thing we have not determined is how he got the twisty on the outside of the bag." Now, of course, I laughed because the whole purpose, I think, of that story was to relieve stress. And there's a whole literature on the use of gallows humor in the healthcare system. So, cultivating humor, now that's pretty dramatic humor, but sometimes the colleagues we work with, I could say this in academia because I've worked in academia for 45 years. It could be a pretty humorless place. And I think humor and laughter in your work life, as well as in your private life, is very, very important as a self-care strategy. And I can tell you, as a former dean, I often relied on my own humor to get through very difficult situations, especially when we were advocating for resources for the college. So humor and laughter is, that's one of my favorite strategies. And I will find ways to use humor, and there's a good treatment of it in the book. I'm going to end. We'll have 15 minutes.
We're coming up on the quarter hour.
I'm going to end with this. I love this quote. Dominic of Calaruga, it's Saint Dominic. He was a monk. And I love this quote because I think it's what we're trying to achieve in advocating self-care and assessing your own stressors and developing your own self-care protocol. A cyclone, which is a terrible storm, derives its powers from a calm center. And so does a person. And so do you, if your center is calm. So that's kind of the thought I'll leave you with, and we'll see if there are any questions.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that final thought and just that whole idea of centering ourselves in order to be able to provide the best care to our clients and our patients. That if we don't find that, it's actually hard to do our job and hard to do it well and hard to meet the mission. So let's go into the gallery.
Sarah, it's also so important when you're a teacher to have that calm center, because I think it's very difficult for students to learn from a teacher who projects an aura of anger or confusion or who doesn't have that calm center. I think students learn much more effectively if they have someone who, as I've had students here, keeps their calm. It's just easier to get through difficult situations that way. So it's also a message, not just for direct caregivers.
Well, I agree. I think that if we don't manage our stress, we cut off access to our own resources. And it's hard to bring our full capacity to the work we do, whether it's teaching or direct care. Inviting those who are here to turn on your camera if you wish and are comfortable doing so. And we know that Dr. Donnelly is ready and curious for the dialogue and for your questions. So go ahead, Gloria. How about if you recognize, you go ahead and call on people as you see their digital or true hands coming up.
So Jane, do you have your hand up?
I did, Gloria. Thank you very much. What a lovely presentation. I was reading through your book and I saw that you touched on wicked problems, which is a concept that you like quite a bit. And I was wondering, as I was listening to this presentation, I was thinking about stress as a wicked problem in that, we think we can get a handle on it and then it'll change and morph, and we may come up with strategies, then the strategies change and morph, and our need to be resilient to the ways stresses change throughout our life. So I was wondering if you could speak to that.
Well, Jane, that's a wonderful application of the wicked problem concept. Because a wicked problem, I gave a workshop on wicked problems at a hospital in Cape May. Rosemary Dunn left. When she left Hahnemann, she became the chief nursing officer there, and she invited me to do a talk on wicked problems. And of course, a wicked problem is a problem that never really goes away, much like stress in your life. And it's not something you look for a solution to. It's a problem that you look to ameliorate or move in a different direction or suffice. And I worked with this group of nurse managers, and we were talking about, they gave me examples of some problems they were dealing with. And some of them certainly were wicked because they kept morphing, changing. When you attempt to intervene, the problem becomes something else. It's kind of like curriculum, I think. I think curriculum's a wicked problem. At the end of the workshop, and we talked about you have to get rid of your solving mindset and move to a sufficing mindset. In other words, did I do enough? Did I really apply all that I could to move this situation forward? And I was packing up my papers, and this nurse came up to me, a nurse. She had been nurse manager for a lot of years, and she had tears in her eyes. And I said, "Oh, are you okay?" And she said, "I just wanted to tell you that I got so much out of this, learning the difference between trying to solve everything and have closure and this sufficing that you talk about." She said, "I've been beating myself up for 5 years." And she said, "I'm a perfectionist and I keep thinking I'm going to fix everything. And I don't know. I know now that I can't." And I want to thank you for validating that I don't have to solve every problem. And it was very profound. And she walked out of the room, and I thought, wow, and I think there are a lot of people who think that everything they do has to end up with a specific positive result. And that's just not the way life is. So Jane, does that answer your question?
Yep. Thank you very much.
I want to thank you so much for that question, Jane. We actually had planned that we would talk a little bit about the wicked problems earlier in the seminar, and we didn't get to it. So I'm really glad that you brought the question in and you gave us a chance to touch on that. So thank you. Darren, are there any questions in the chat?
No, there are no questions in the chat.
Right. Have at it. Anybody else?
I see Connie and Diane. Let's see who else. That's Christine Mulhorn, Pam, Alicia, Catherine, Melinda. I don't know Amanda. But thank you all for attending. And if you have a question or a comment, I'd be happy to answer it. My email, and I did have a slide, Darren, how do I get back to my slides? Here it is. Okay, I do have, here we go.
You need to share your screen again, Dr. Donnelly.
Oh, I do? Okay. Share. I'm really getting good at this for an old lady. I want you to, here's the reference for the book, the journal, and here's my email. And if you think of anything that you want to ask, you know, if you're mulling things over and you think of something and you'd like to ask me, please feel free to email. And I'll be happy to. I'm very compulsive with email, and I certainly will get back to you.
We do have a few more minutes. I see a hand from Diane and from Connie.
Okay, Diane.
So, real quick.
Sure. Wonderful to see you, Gloria. And I apologize, I couldn't make the first half, so maybe you covered this. But in talking about the stress part, think about mindsets, a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset?
Well, you know, mindset is part of it. And I think one of the purposes of the 60 self-assessment questions in the book is to help you figure out what your mindset is. There are lots of people that have fixed mindsets, but they don't realize how fixed it is. And that they don't have what I call psychic fluidity. You know, they can't go with the flow on certain things. I agree with you that mindset is crucial. Now, a growth mindset, well, you could think of it as growth. I think of it as self-care. I would rather you have a self-care mindset, because a growth mindset for some people means maybe putting extra pressure on them. So what are you growing for? Certainly, if you're taking better care of yourself, if you're assessing your own mindset, your own approach to life, if you're assessing the people around you, your friends, if you're assessing your nutrition and your physical activity, your spirituality, that is going to affect your mindset. You could call that growth, and that's okay. But I call it self-care. I think that's the essence of self-care, really thinking about and figuring out how you behave and how people react to you and how you react to them. I'm sure there are people in your life, you know, I remember when I worked at the university and I was a dean, there were certain people that outside of the college that I would avoid being with because of my own feelings and because we would get into situations that could eventually have negative effects on the college. So I would avoid interactions with certain people, and because I know myself. And so even at that level, I think that helps you, this self-examination, this self-caring aspect helps you to grow. But I don't call it that, I call it self-care.
It's a different paradigm. It's a different
Right.
paradigm, really, how you look at it.
Yeah. Connie, did you have your hand up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I was going back to, I knew I had a question for you from earlier, and I just remembered what it was. So it's back to that, the story when you were a student, and and
Yes.
how you second guessed yourself, and it's just heart-wrenching. And I've had students come to me with, different
Similar
particulars,
story.
but similar kind of things. And and there's a power dynamic so that really makes it extremely difficult for students to to do otherwise. I mean,
Right.
it's a combination of power and a lack of knowledge, right?
Well,
A lack of experience,
right.
right?
And you know what,
So-
Connie, I'm glad you brought that up. That's really important. So there I was as a student. The power dynamic was there. I had a teacher saying, you can't do that. You know
Right.
the rules. So what do I do? Do I risk?
Yeah.
Do I risk saying to the teacher, I don't agree with you in front of the patient? Of course, I didn't do that. But what that incident did was prepare me for things I would experience later in my career.
Mhm.
So later in my career, I kind of went a little bit crazy. I was out picketing a hospital and a nun
Okay.
fired me.
I remember that.
You remember that? Now,
You gave me the article that you wrote.
okay, so I
Good.
believe, Connie, that experience with that instructor, that power dynamic, and similar ones like that throughout my student nursing career primed me not to behave that way when I was out and when I was a nurse and when I did have some power.
Mhm.
And so then I didn't back down. Now, I went a little overboard, but okay, I got through it. I got fired, but a Christian brother saved me, my colleague at LaSalle. And after that incident, he called me because I got fired and I was home. And he said, he was the Dean of Arts and Sciences at LaSalle, which is how I ended up at LaSalle. And he said to me, so what are you going to do now, Gloria? And I said, I don't know. I don't know if I'll ever work again in nursing, not after all the press and all this. And he said, well, you really had to open your big South Philly mouth, didn't you? He was from South Philly too. I said, yeah, I guess I did. And he said, let me ask you this. If you had to do it all over again, would you do it? Would you speak out? Would you pick it the way you did? I said, brother, his name is Brother James. I said, brother, I'd have to say yes. I don't think I could have done it any differently and lived with myself. And he said, you're hired. And
Oh,
that's how I landed at LaSalle. You're hired. And he had 4 months worth of grant money. And I went and did a feasibility study for a nursing program. And 2 years later, they hired me to lead that program and develop it. So, and that was kind of validating, Connie. I mean, here I have this, religious. I was fired by a nun and I have a Christian brother, saving me and saying, if you believe in the ethics of what you did, and you teach ethics, you know that. If you believe in it, then I want you on my team. And that was very validating that, you know, somewhere in academia, there was somebody who understood that. And he was my great mentor.
You know, I'm just really hearing a theme, Gloria, and in response to your question, Connie and others, of you know, this connection between you know, the self-awareness and in this case, sort of you know, the self-awareness gives people a way to follow their gut, to follow their instincts, and to trust them, and
You could
that
trust them,
ultimately
right.
does become a form of self-care. And
Right.
I'm noticing the hour, that we need to bring things to a close. There have been some fabulous messages for you, Gloria, that have gone into
Yeah.
the chat. I think Darren's going to be able to copy them and capture them before we
Good.
finish
And
off, so
feel
you're
free
able
to
to see
write.
those messages. Yeah, you all have the email GD27. For those of you who have been around a while, you'll probably recognize that email
Right.
handle. And Darren, do you have anything to say as we finish up, Gloria? I just want to say thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure to spend this time together.
Lots of fun. Thank you. Thanks,
no-
Darren, for all your help.
Thank you so much, Dean Donnelly. Thank you, Dr. Goodall. Thank you, Sherry, for helping us out. Please join us not next week, but the week after for any of our other Tuesday topics. And thanks a lot. See you guys next time.